Today, we will be chatting with one of the key minds behind the Spanish poker community, Raúl Mestre, aka Sir Donald. Raúl has been in poker for over 2 decades and has been the to-go-to coach for many of Spain's most successful players.
And obviously, if you put any player of this era back 10 years, they will absolutely destroy the tables to a degree it will be comical.
A lot of these very strong players, they come to you for coaching. Why do you think that is? What are they actually looking to learn from you that, for example, solvers or working with MDA and other resources can't teach them?
First thing, and I know that those are very old concepts, I've had high-stakes players paying money to explain me the most basic shit around the game you could imagine.
Then all of a sudden we start playing for $10,000 and it's that decision's not clear anymore, so emotions quickly come into it. So how do players develop that?
Raúl, I've battled quite a lot of Spanish players over the years, and they are constantly tough to beat, and I've been told that that's basically your fault. Why should we be blaming you for this?
Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration, maybe more than a bit. What's true is that very early on, and I'm speaking about 2006 to 2007, I'm one of or maybe the main guy who started creating high quality Spanish content, which there wasn't almost anything back there, just a few international schools translating very basic stuff. And I always love to learn by processing information, trying to explain it, right? For me, that's a very nice way to learn because you need to solidify everything you want to explain. I started just for I wasn't making any money of it, but I started my own blog when that was a thing. I had my own website where I was writing articles, which was painful. It's very, very demanding, having to write something down and then kind of structure it so it makes sense. And that's how it started very, very early on. But that helped creating an environment where players were discussing things from a strategic standpoint, analytic standpoint. I was very into data analysis back then, where it was very easy to get histories from all over the sites. I also created the hub people uses mostly now. I think it's very, very, very common. I started deciding which stats were very useful to have while you were playing. And that was useful not only for people, because nowadays you don't get those stats that often, but it's a common ground thing that allowed people to discuss hands, knowing which stats and which values they were talking about, which didn't exist before that. So it kind of created the framework where people started to discuss stuff, and then that later on grow into a school, into more stuff. Yeah,
you're the founder, right, of EducaPoker. Actually, how I first heard about EducaPoker, obviously you have the famous EducaPoker Andres Artinano.
Yeah, that's difficult to pronounce for you guys.
Yeah, Spanish is a hard language. But I always kind of was on the understanding, that's EducaPoker from EducaPoker. But then I clarified that with you, said, no, he's just a student of us who was very happy who just picked the nickname.
Yeah, he was very glad. So he decided that was his nickname. He didn't even tell us back then. So, okay, that's fine. He did great. Obviously, I guess you already know about him. He was a very, when you coach players, there are people that, maybe you grab him very early on in his career and you know that someone is going to do great because the way he thinks about the game is going to to bring him success very quickly. He was one of those guys. I've had a few of those, but he was clearly one of those.
What are the signs?
Usually it's about, there are 2 things. One is being able to put the emotional part aside. The reason why many players are successful, even though they study and they do a good analytic approach during their off-the-table time, is that they aren't able to emotionally put distance between them and what's happening at the tables. When that happens, even though you might be a great, let's call it offline player, that means that if you aren't actually gambling your money, you can find very, very good decisions. Once emotions kick in, your brain shuts down and you aren't able to play your A game, and you will notice it while you are playing. That's way harder to fight, and you need a very different mindset. That's one thing, right? Like people that clearly makes analytical analysis, and they are good of putting the emotions on one side. The other critical thing, because when we are talking reaching the highest level, it's never easy, and obviously just a few percent of them will get there. Obviously, you also need good, intuitive understanding of. I'm going to say math because I don't know the English word, but it's not exactly like math is a very big and complex thing. It's just a few things like being very intuitive with percentages. It's key. Some people think that poker is a math genius thing, you need to be, and it's not that. But what's critical is that's intuitive to you, that you are good at making very fast decisions. When you play online, you usually have 5 seconds or 10 seconds maybe for each decision. Depends on the amount of tables you play. So being very intuitive and very quick is important. It makes a big difference, and you can see that quickly when you are discussing cards with someone.
I think also it goes in line, right, with the first point. I think you kind of summarize performance qualities, right? Are they good performers at the table? Actually, I agree with you also in obviously people always ask me wait, aren't you a poker player? Should you be good at math? I'm intuitive math, I kind of intuitive it feels like my hand has enough equity, fault equity, we call it. It all kind of merges in one feeling that's probably this is good,
Yeah, but what's important is that you get there in 3 seconds. It's not that useful to be able to be extremely precise, but if it takes a longer amount of time, because you won't have it. My brother, he's smart, way smarter than me. He's a math ass. He knows lots of math stuff that I can't even, my brain won't work that way. But he won't beat me at board games or strategy games because his decision making is a little bit slower. And the emotional side I talked before, that's also critical.
So we talked about Andres, EducaPoker, obviously a bit more of an old school. I think he probably stopped around 2017. I remember actually when I started moving up and battling 5K, he was the established one. And I remember very quickly I took him off my list of guys, okay, this is not someone I'm going after. He was definitely one of the stronger guys I faced. I do definitely remember that. But he was just about to quit, and I was just kind of starting to emerge in the high stakes scene. Just one of the names, right, that you coached. There's probably no Spanish successful player that has not worked with you either directly or indirectly. Even after having stopped competing yourself many, many years ago, and even up until today, a lot of these very strong players, they come to you for coaching. Why do you think that is? What are they actually looking to learn from you that, for example, solvers or working with MDA and other resources can teach them?
Okay, that's a bit complex to explain. I'm going to try to do it. And it's not let's say, it's not always been like that. I feel that nowadays, the kind of analysis that I do is more requested than it was 5 years or 8 years ago. I think that's when solver love peaked. People thought that if you were just mimicking a solver to the best of your abilities, you were going to do great. And since I was learning the game decades, or at least 15 years maybe, before solvers ever existed, my analysis was always about trying to max EP in each single decision, and that implied that I needed to be good at estimating what brought EV in a given situation, right? And that made it way easier for me to exploit stuff around, because I was if something if there's a scenario where they are doing this, they are faulting that or they are raising this, for me it's very intuitive to find an exploit to that thing. When service first emerged and became extremely popular, let's call it, my skill set was a little bit less demanded because people thought that it was useless because you could just do the solver thing. I always thought that it was a bit silly, but even myself, right now I may be the biggest hater on the solver thing around, but when it emerged, I even spent a few months trying to figure it out and to understand the way it worked. And I finally noticed that it was very counterproductive to people who tries to play to exploit stuff, because it made you focus on the wrong thing. So let me try to explain that. Okay, when you study through a solver, the whatever tree you are trying to find, solutions will always be obviously complex in the sense that ranges will always be split. The more options you give the solver, the more splits will be. By the way, when the solver is splitting a decision, it means that the EV of both things, it's basically the same, and it's only trying to balance your range to avoid potential exploitation, like what the nemesis will do if I put all of my combos of this hand here, I have too many in my, let's say, 3-bet range and too little in my defend range. So they could exploit in some kind of boards by doing this or doing that, right? Okay. You have people who's studying that, trying to mimic that to the best of their abilities, which is extremely toxic and extremely complex. And that makes that they lose the focus to look outside, to look for mistakes. Once you stop looking for mistakes, it's going to be way harder to increase your win rate by exploiting other players, because just your own game is so complex that you easily keep a track of what you are actually doing. I'm trying to raise this hand here at least 35% of the time. That's like very difficult to keep track in each different board and each different range, depending on all the variables we know that they're around. But you stop looking for what they are doing wrong, which for me is the key mistake. I guess I've spent many hours just analyzing patterns of other players. That's one of the things I do for very high stakes profiles. I try to analyze the highest stakes players, trying to find places where they are imbalanced. And at present time, one good thing is that people who feels they are balanced feel like they don't need to adjust much, if at all, because they feel that they are protected, right? Back 8 years ago, people was crazy about solvers, and the reasons are those. But the problem it brought them is that it made it it kind of handicapped them in ways that they noticed. So they were feeling very uncomfortable doing adjustments, and in ways that they didn't notice, which was that they weren't picking up so many patterns. So that was always my thing, trying to pick up patterns and try to find, let's call it, thoughts of people or how a player would approach a situation that they haven't studied that much, trying to predict what their intuitive answers to that situation will be. And you can exploit those a lot. And it's actually, to a degree, it's easier now than it's ever been with good players, because they will adjust back way less and way more reluctantly. At least a few of them, like the ones that are very solver oriented.
Because I feel like they don't have to defend themselves because they're perfect.
Actually, they even feel like you made a mistake if you played something clearly out of the machine. Like if you
so it only encouraged them to do the same thing more.
Of course, obviously, you are making a mistake because you are playing, let's say, whatever hand should not be there. You are calling with a hand that's out of, for whatever reason, that hand should not be calling the turn, right? So that's your mistake. You are losing EP because the solver says so. Okay, but maybe there's a reason why I'm trying. There are mistakes, and maybe there is something that I'm trying to exploit here, and you aren't even going to consider it, which, I mean, that's normal to happen, because in order to play high stakes, you need to be very confident about your game. If your confidence breaks down, you are doomed. You are messed up. You are playing with the smartest people, at least in the poker community, which are very smart individuals who spend lots of time trying to hone their craft. And if you lose confidence, you are going to not be able to play your A game or even your B game, let's call it, and you are dead weight. But for them, feeling so confident about what they are doing makes them less able to adapt to stuff. Also because let's say, and that's another trap that the solver world brings to people. Let's say you are studying a raise flop scenario, okay, where you are c-betting the button, whatever hand you are c-betting, and you are facing a raise. Okay, you are trying to study that scenario, and you see that your opponent is, let's say, under raise in that spot. Okay, and you fix that range on the solver, his racing range, I mean, and you see the solution, right? And you feel, okay, that's fine, I'm trying to exploit that. But there are a few critical things or mistakes that happen there. Like the main thing is that once you do that, the solver is going to assume that the guy is playing like the nemesis for whatever is left of the hand, which if we are discussing a flop race, it's quite a bit of action still left. So it will solve the strategy for that thing, like where the perfect opponent made a race with a given range, and then he will bluff accordingly or value bet accordingly, your calling range, and all of that. But in the real world, when someone races way differently, let's say like in this instance, like a way lower frequency right there. There are like two distinct possibilities. One, the guy likes to slow play a lot, so his range is like full of shit. He likes bluffing, let's say in dry boards, he likes over bluffing those. So you should not be playing, because if he does that, what he's going to do in later streets will also parry. Like, let's make a silly example, right? Let's assume a guy only raises bluffs on the flop on a very dry flop. That's obviously extreme, but let's bear with me. If you go to the solver strategy for this, the nemesis will check fold all of his hands on the turn, because why on earth will he keep betting the turn with a range that's only bluffs? Like, you are forcing me to raise all the bluffs on the deck. Unless I hit the turn, I'm going like, okay, if the board is very dry and there is not even relevant turns, I will mostly check fold every hand if my bluffs have no equity, right? So that's the EV you will get from 3-betting the flop or calling will be basically the same. I don't even know what the solution will be, but there will be a mix. But when you go to a human who's raised the flop with a range that's full of crap, he will keep blasting off a lot. So 3-betting the flop will be a huge mistake against him. That's like, I understand that example is a bit silly, but that's something that if you just focus on putting the range on the flop and seeing the solution, you are missing out on a lot of money. Because what he will do afterwards, it's very important to review, and you can possibly do that, like, because you'll need to pin the range down for every branch of the tree. So, like, what I'm trying to say is that I think there are people who thinks that they can study exploits via solver, and they don't notice why they can't easily do that.
I like your example, right? Because like you said, obviously, if the solver is always going to check fold unless he picks up good equity, then you might as well 3-bet the flop, right? And it's the same. Like, let's say someone under raises flop, right? He's a bit on the nittier side. Well, then obviously, if he has less bluffs on the flop, he's going to blast turn 80-90%, river 80-90%. But you know, if he's already too nitty on the flop, chances are he's also going to be too nitty on the turn and on the river. Most probably he's not going to make the hero call. So
that's exactly the same thing. Yeah, I see people all the time. One thing that I like to tell the people I coach is that if your opponent is going to be making mistakes, let's say on the river, you don't want to be finishing the hand on the turn that often. Like, that's a bit of in Spanish we say refrán, like a made up thing to say. Then situations change, equity, like this game is complex, right? But if I have a guy who under bluffs the turn, like the river, raising the turn is worse. Well, raising the turn I play has the same EV, but calling gets way better. The worse he plays a river. Like, if you're, in your example, if your guy is very nitty and there's like, let's say, a few draws on the flop and he raises very equity oriented, there are adjustments you need to make. For instance, you want to shove the flop very quickly with all of your value range. If you did that against the nemesis, that would be like suicide. He will just blast off every Ronaldo you call, and he will fold a lot when you shove, because like your shoving range is like no bluffs, all value hands. Like, you are doomed. That's never an adjustment the solver will suggest, unless you are able to block all of the branches of the tree. But the need will never blast off like crazy because your value will shove the flop. He doesn't know and won't care, and that's not his thought process, right? So, like, at that, those are like very obvious examples, like the easiest ones I could come up for a podcast. But it happens all all the decisions.
Oh yeah, you kind of. I always like to say you want to get into the node where the biggest mistakes happen, right? So that always means like a future leak has consequences for how you want. Like you said, for example, if someone underbluffs the river, well, you probably want to call the flop more because you're gonna over realize to the river. So every mistake has consequences downwards. Like I feel like there was a group of players that maybe prior to solver were not succeeding, and then post solver it all clicked for them. And you also had kind of the other way around. What are like the positive? I assume there are some positives when it comes down to solver, because a lot of it so far it seems more like the relationship with the solver or how you use it.
First, when we discussed about what makes a cash or a poker player, especially a cash player, successful, like the emotional thing was critical. That obviously it doesn't matter if you study through solver, through whatever way, if you have very good emotional control and you reward, like for me, the key thing with that is feeling great about what you can control, your decision-making process, like getting good rest, good habits, and playing focused on your decisions. That's what should make you feel great, regardless of the results. If like people who's able to do that, they are going to do great. And also smart people, like people who's mentally quick and smart, they are going to do better. Like that's the reality of it, no matter how they approach the game, right? The solver has three great things. One of them is that it created new lines by showing that very like stuff that basically didn't exist or was extremely unusual, like 15 years ago, let's call it jamming 3 times the pot on the river. That didn't happen ever back in 2009. That was a line that didn't exist. Or betting 10% of the pot in some scenarios. Just by showing people that those lines are a possibility, that's a tool. Because it kind of validates them and that opens people's mind to very different lines. Back in the day, I used lots of very different sizes to like what was the meta, and still I was like very, very conservative if you compare it to what the solver is doing. That's a good thing. Let's call it brought innovation in regards of what's actually, let's call it proper to like donk bets. I was donking bet 15 years ago. It's good to see now that like when you see like the optimal solution, there are donks around in different scenarios, right? And that's one good thing. Another thing that's helpful for people is the confidence boost. The fact that you have like a structure to your game. You feel safe to play because you kind of know in the common, at least in most common scenarios, what the game should look like. For people like me, it's very useful to say that's useless because like if I've been around for 20 years, I've been playing enough where that's kind of in my head. I know what the ranges look like, how ranges interact, and like how my hand interact against his range, and how like equity turns into money depending on the properties of each different hand. But for people who's way younger than me, I guess, and starts with the game, that's a long process of learning. And the solver kind of gives you a shortcut to that. So I understand this is a situation where I can bet often because that's what the solver says early on. And then if you use it more like a tool for getting the ideas in situations where you are unsure about what should be happening, that's good. It's also important to things you can do where they won't suspect you are doing something weird because the solver grabs that line sometimes. So you can maybe brutally overbluff something, but because the solver sometimes uses that very, let's call it weird line, but you can do it either as a bluff or as a value, depending on the line or whatever the situation is. But that gives you a way to mask your game. Because that's one of the lies about the whole solver thing or solver versus exploitative thing, is that it's actually impossible to know people's frequencies in a given spot. You can look for averages like, okay, if a guy oversebets on average, I will guess that he oversebets certain types of boards over others. But knowing how much a guy c-bets it, Jack 9-4, okay, like, what are we talking about here? Unless the guy has like, he c-bets like every single board, how I am going to know how, like, each specific situation is unique and different, and they won't come over often enough so you can actually know where the guy is doing some stuff. What I am trying to say is that if you are a good player, you'll know that the solver picks some lines, even if it's just in a low frequency, and you can do with that whatever you want, because you can do it 10 times more often and no one will ever be able to adapt because they won't know it. They will know it. But just knowing that the solver does it sometimes protects you from them thinking it's something, let's call it weird or out of line.
Yeah, I see the solver more as like a sparring partner, right? That sometimes gives me suggestions, but you should definitely not just say like, oh yeah, this is the way. Okay, interesting. I'm like, okay, well, but why not? You know, or why
okay,
do you?
yeah,
and then you go down the tree like, oh, why do you do that? Okay, so you don't do this because of this, huh? Okay, well, is that a valid point? Maybe.
Also, that's very important, but that's useful for like coming of the solver era. It brought some theory concepts that weren't so prevalent back then. I've always been good at putting names to theory concepts. That's something that I've done quite a lot. For instance, how valuable it is to avoid your opponent bluffing spots. So sometimes you have to raise a few hands in scenarios where your hand is neither a great value raise or a bluff, like medium pairs in 3-bet pots out of position come to mind. Where you sometimes, like if you raise 9s, 10s, whatever in a low board, like you are actually making money just because when he folds, you aren't allowing him to barrel when you have a hand that will be really in a very expensive spot when facing barrels, because your blockers won't be good. You won't have, like, you have 2 outs against his value range, and his bluffs have way more equity against you, right? So that's a concept that today exists. Like, okay, I need to not allow him to bluff so much in this scenario because he's printing money just by bluffing there. And that didn't back then, or at least only in the most obvious scenarios. So those are good things that the solver brought to the, let's call it, theory, or at least to my understanding of poker.
Yeah, if you break it down and play with the variables and see how the things interact with each other, in there you can learn valuable theoretical concepts about how the game is supposed to be played, right? I always say, like in the solver, you can learn theory or you can learn GTO strategy. GTO strategy, not very useful, but the theoretical concepts behind certain plays, very useful in my opinion. How you then implement it at the table, that depends, right, on the situation.
Obviously, trying to implement GTO strategy, actual GTO strategy for a 600, because like the 600 games are even more complex because there are wildly more pre-flop situations and each one of them has very different trees. The deeper you go, the crazier it gets. So trying to implement GTO, I'm guessing, and I haven't played that for heads-up matches in high stakes where friends battle each other, it might be more useful because there are less different situations. Like you only have 2 pre-flop positions, so you are either obviously playing the small blind or the big blind, so there isn't that much to study. And like in each tree, you can look to what your opponent does, which will be you in the other position. So you are kind of doing both things at the same time, at the same time, and that's mostly what heads up is about. So I'm guessing there it might be more useful. While that's not something I coach or I have played, for very high stakes players, it could make sense. I always wonder if both of them are doing that, how to beat rake. That's like a different thing. But other than that, I think it's a bit, first, it's impossible. I don't think you can actually, well, maybe for humans with like different brain than mine, I will be terrible at trying to mimic something so complex. I guess people who has great visual memory might be able to do so, like kind of become like a human solver, something like that, which if you can go that route, I guess great for you. I'm sure you can do lots of very valuable stuff with that superpower better than crushing the high stakes. But I don't even think you'd crush mid stakes that much because you'd be missing out a lot of money against nits and the wrecks. Even in high stakes, there are a few tables that are like, I assure you, when there is like a very weak player at the table, your strategy should not even look remotely similar to what the solver says.
Yeah, I think it can help you definitely build like some sort of kind of what you said, right? Some sort of like defensive baseline, something to fall back on, like, and then from there, you can start to play poker.
But that's a trap. Like, okay, yes, that's true. If you feel very insecure about your game, having a, let's call it fallback plan where I feel safe, that might feel very comforting, and that's one of the what they call traps of the solver. But don't forget that when you go that way, you stop trying. You stop trying to find mistakes in other players. When you stop trying to find mistakes in other players, I mean,
that's where it ends.
Gave up. And by the way, rake, if you play very, very high stakes, rake is less meaningful, right? But mid to low stakes, and it's like each year it gets a little bit higher. Like, and that's been around for many, many years, right? If you can successfully beat rake, you want to be profiting from the tables. When rake gets higher, everyone is kind of playing. I mean, saying GTO is a bit silly. No one is actually playing GTO. But when no one is trying to exploit people, it's difficult to beat rake because you aren't aggressively exploiting mistakes, and you are actually making some huge blunders against the meta. Like if you actually try to play balanced, you are bluffing in scenarios where like you are printing money on fire, like with, I don't know, like half the success you need for your bluffs. So your overall, obviously you'll be doing great in some other scenarios, don't get me wrong. But like your overall EV would be amazing because you are not exploiting your meta. Actually, another tendency, I like it more, is like the metagame analysis and trying to hone your game to beat your average player in the metagame. Those players, you can easily identify them because they are extremely over-aggressive. Usually when you average a metagame, for decades now, all of the metagames are always overfolding in scenarios and especially being overly passive, like they don't counter bluff enough, and that leads to wanting to play a very aggressive strategy in most metas. When you play the average, obviously that means that you are making mistakes against a few opponents who will kind of destroy you by overcalling and counter bluffing. But against the average, you should do great. That's like another way of analyzing it. That's, for instance, the way you have to approach if you want to play any kind of anonymous games, like where there is no data. That's the way to study that. But obviously, that's like if you know the particular tendencies of an opponent, you should try to not play against the average, but against him.
Coin poker has leveled up. It was already one of my favorite sites to play on as they host the one and only Cash Game World Championship. And with this new software update, the playing experience now truly matches their status and ambitions. To celebrate this, Coin Poker is giving back 100% of rake you pay throughout the entire month of March. No fuzz, no ifs, just sit down and play and get 100% rake back. But there is more. Their tournament structures and guarantees have also leveled up. The Level Up series on Coin Poker is running throughout the month of March, with their main event being on Sunday the 22nd, with futures 3 buy-in levels so anyone can participate. The games have absolutely exploded, so make sure to hop in and get your piece of the action. So solvers, you kind of say, is a no-go, right? They draw you away from what's the most important thing. They limit intuitive answers. So if solvers aren't the answer, then how should players study poker in your opinion? How do you actually build like strong intuition for the game?
First thing, and I know that those are like very old concepts, I've got high stakes players paying money to explain me like the most basic shit around the game you could imagine, like just to understand what EV is and how, like, okay, how much do I win when I bluff in a spot, right? Would you know, off the top of your head, if a guy overfolds, let's say he should be calling 40% in a given spot and he's folding 60%, how much you are making there? Can you say that in like 3 seconds? Because it seems silly, but that's important. It's important if you want to know, okay, this guy is overbluffing the river. I think this guy is overbluffing the river if I do this. But he's also making, let's say, I make money by calling or by raising. How much money I'm making? When you are playing, you need to be able to at least have a good estimation of those numbers. If you don't even know that, it's very difficult to then make decisions based on that. Let's start by learning that, and then you can try to find out how much you make by creating openings for that line more often, if it's worth it or not. How much EV can I sacrifice to overbluff the river later on? If it happens 30% of the time, I can find that spot where he's overfolding by that much.
If you had to summarize your teaching philosophy in a few core principles, which would stand out?
Trying to max the EV of each hand you play, that will be number one. In regard of the technical part of the game, okay, let's put aside the emotional part of it for a moment, because that's also extremely important. Just max the EV of each hand you play, and for that, you'll need the tools to know how much EV you are making from your hand. And stop over worrying about what will happen to your ranges. The ranges will fix themselves. Actually, the way the solver does stuff is only trying to max the EV of each hand, but he's fine-tuning it, like playing against the nemesis, which is doing the same against the same range, until it kind of stabilizes. That's why it splits ranges so much. But if you fix one range, and the solver wouldn't be able to readapt, then you could simplify your strategy by a lot, and you wouldn't be in trouble, right? So one of the first things I try to teach people is obviously how to estimate their EV of in different scenarios, and to not worry so much about adaptations, because things will happen. This game is too complex for that. You need to be doing something very, very, very blatant. And yes, okay. Like, I'm not going to be having 3 different sizings of 3-bet, and in one of them, I only have value hands. Why not? Because that scenario comes up too often. So for a frag, it will be way too easy to notice that if I 3-bet to, let's say, 5 times the opening, I always have value, or strong hands. And my bluffs are always doing, let's say, 4 times. I understand that's true. But what's not true is that if I'm racing each time with, let's say, I'm over-racing the flop with bottom pair, that's going to be difficult to notice. Very difficult to notice, because the scenario doesn't come around that often where that's a board when I want to over-raise, and bottom pair is a hand that could be racing there with some frequency. So do they know if I'm doing it 45% or 80%? You can know, could you say that about any opponent? Like, if a guy is over-submitting a given board, I don't think that's even. I've been studying people with thousands of hands, so like people who plays in like the coin poker, whatever they call it, where you can see the hands all the time, and you can pinpoint some stuff like how they proceed when a card is good for the range or is bad for the range, or like that kind of stuff by looking hours and hours. It's extremely difficult even with the hands face up. And if you play differently against each player because you are trying to exploit different things, it's even laughable. Like, okay, I am over-betting against you because I feel that you overfold the turn when whatever scenario happens. But I'm not over-betting against the other guy where I am massively under-betting because he over-raises and I don't like bluffing that scenario. So you see the averages, like, what the hell are you going to notice? That's something that Solver made people way over-wary about.
Yeah, people are often very paranoid. I usually give the same one, like, well, do you know? Yeah, okay, I don't. And I am the same as you, like, especially a long time ago where basically exploitive poker was, quote, quote, all there was. I was paying attention to everything, and even I didn't know. I was like, well, if I don't know, then the chances are that they don't know is very, very, very great.
Especially if you go mid-stakes where pools of players are bigger, then it's like comical. Like the idea, it makes me laugh every time.
Adam, we talked a lot about the emotional side of the game. How do you see like the strategical side and the emotional side kind of correlate? We already talked a little bit about, solvers giving you a certain amount of certainty and therefore you can perform better. Maybe you can elaborate your thoughts on this topic. Yeah,
I'm interested to hear Raúl's topic as well, because I think it's a one where we talk about making decisions and we think we're very logical. And I feel like in reality, we make a lot of emotional decisions and we basically act on emotion, then logic kicks in later. And as poker players, we fight against this and we think we get to a point where emotions don't come into the equation, or we get clever enough to bypass that, when in reality, there's always an interplay between every decision you make and the emotions you're experiencing. So I think it's one of those things where when you talk to someone who's got emotional control, they're able to navigate feeling emotions and making good decisions. The emotions don't override the decision-making process. There's still an interaction there, but it's not hijacking their kind of functioning. So with that, you'll see someone who's very good outside of the game, the way they think about poker. They can then use that knowledge in-game at the tables when emotions become present. Because if we have a talk about strategy outside of a playing dynamic, no emotions, we're all very calm. Then all of a sudden we start playing for $10,000 and it's like, that decision's not clear anymore, so emotions quickly come into it. So yeah, I'm interested for you, Raúl, to talk about, you mentioned talented students having good emotional control and maybe detaching that side from the game. How do players develop that? I know obviously there's an element of talent, there's an element of some people have less emotional kind of hijacks than others, but how do players learn to navigate being emotional and to get better at controlling them at the tables?
There is one very important thing, and this that I don't think there is like a singular perfect solution for everyone, because brains function very, very differently. That's like all of us kind of know it, but like in my personal case, I learned, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago, that I had something that's called, I think it's a fantasy. So I'm not able to imagine things, like see images in my brain, right? When I close my eyes and I think thoughts, all I can think about are words. I can never re-listen to anything I've heard in the past, like a song or something like that, or see an image or even see movement in my head or stuff like that. I can only listen to words. I learned that when that happens because people like me, we have, let's call it, less connection between, or like the two sides, the two mind sides of our brain. That means that when we are focused and concentrated with like the emotional part of the brain, it's kind of shut down. Not completely, it's never completely shut down, right? But when the emotional part of the brain is on, like the other side for us, it kind of shuts down. And that's something that happens to, like, I don't know, it's 1% of people or stuff like that. I know that Adrián Mateos, for instance, has the same thing. And my guess is that's helpful for successful poker players because it makes it easier for us to shut down the emotions while we are playing. And I'm guessing that for a brain, it's easier to process words. Like, let's imagine it's a computer, right? It takes less bandwidth to just process a few words than a full image. So it makes us quicker in our thoughts, but we can only process information that's very easy to condense in words. For instance, in my case, I'm good at some kind of strategy games, but I'm terrible. I'm really bad at, for instance, chess. Why is that? Because chess, like a chessboard and the next 8 moves that people can see in their head, is something that people with my, whatever you want to call it, my brain, I cannot possibly see a board of chess or easily summarize it in a few words. That means that for me it's easy to like separate the emotional part while I'm playing, and all I need is to focus on the right things and tell myself the right thoughts if like I'm starting to shut down and go to the emotional side of my brain. It's very like, for me it's very easy, but that won't work the same for each person. If you are able to convince yourself that your success will come from that and you link your positive emotions to that behavior, that's what will lead you to success. If you feel emotions strongly and you attach your emotions to results, you are bound to fail. You win hands by making mistakes. You lose hands by playing great, making great decisions all the time. You have losing days where you played great. You have winning days where you played like shit, and that breaks you down. You are like, you are going to be inside a whirlwind of emotions, which will make you play worse and worse and worse, and that you will eventually become a losing player. And that's it.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned there, it's like the feedback loop isn't right for poker. Like you can do the right action and get a negative result, and therefore we don't learn from poker in the same way, and it creates emotional responses. So if you attach your emotions to winning or losing, you're just getting a bad feedback mechanism, which isn't allowing you to actually accurately navigate it. And yeah, you mentioned there as well, like how your performance, like over the long term, is just about showing up, process. But in terms of emotions coming up, the way I look at it, it's like we've got an emotional baseline. So everyone's sitting here watching this video, listening along. Is it a certain emotional baseline? Then certain things happen that trigger like peak emotional experiences or emotional reactions. And most of those, when you kind of navigate those and you look at them and you introspect, you see a lot of them come from fear. Fear of uncertainty, fear of failure, fear of not being enough. And with that the emotions respond to almost like prime you to kind of deal with that situation. So I think when you're trying to improve your ability to be more in control of your emotions, try to understand like what things trigger you, like trigger response relationship. There's this like, as you're playing poker, there's things that are happening that make you feel fearful, things that cause a risk, things that make you feel uncertain, and understanding your own cocktail. The same way you have tendencies in your poker game, you have tendencies of emotions, things that come up. In this spot, I feel uncertain, in this emotion comes up. So as you mentioned, each brain is unique, each one's emotional experience is unique, but you need to understand your own cocktail that you're experiencing and learn to navigate with your tendencies, because if you don't, emotions are almost like driving a lot of decisions, and if you just let them play out, you're never going to be able to make like good, logical, rational decisions, because emotions are just hijacking a lot of it. So yeah, I think it's a big deep dive for a lot of people who don't have a certain brain like yours where they can detach from it, to use almost like poker as your training ground. Just watch what happens, watch what spikes emotions in game, and learn to basically explore that. And what you'll see is a strong meaning you give to events, fears, insecurities, things that are getting triggered by poker, and you can learn to work through them. There's a whole process you can do to get more control by being more comfortable with your emotions. But yeah, when you said something about your brain is good at poker, but it struggles with things like chess. And you mentioned the visual part of your brain isn't, that's sort of strongly compromised. For you, what is it about card games? Because I know for you, you did Magic the Gathering growing up, you did other card games before poker. What is it about your brain and your enjoyment of card games that your brain just grabs onto?
I guess it comes down to things that you can easily summarize with words, where I can process them quickly, and I'm good at understanding basic probabilities stuff. That's extremely helpful for any card game where probabilities are around, and they are very often around in games, even if it's not completely black and blatantly obvious, right? That, like Magic would be a very clear example of that. But you don't need any actual like visual thing around your brain to understand Magic at all, I'd say. Maybe you could argue that, I don't know if you guys ever played Magic, but maybe in some very weird scenarios where the board is huge and you have like many things going around. I don't know. I wanted to make a point about something you said that I find interesting, and is that being risk averse, which is, it means that fear is the most common emotion you feel, is the like around 75% of people or even more are risk averse, which is like, let's call it the natural state of things for humans. And that's why every single meta in history has always been slightly passive and overfolder, because that's what fear will do and what risk-averse players will eventually do. When they are in a given scenario, they will tend to fold or not raise if the values too thin, or like to put less money on the pot. Let's call it that way, right? So that's the basic reason why, because we are humans playing, no monkeys. But the best players usually are able to get closer to a neutrality, or because I've also found a few of them never had any aversion to risk in hindsight. But that's challenging on their own. Like they can play better, or they can like play great at the tables, but if they are very risk prone, then they go broke for other reasons. Like they invest in random companies that don't even exist. They get cheated of crypto shit that they should never have taken that level of risk. And that I've known a few of those too.
Yeah, it's got that kind of double-ended sword where you're fearless, which is great because you can make big bluffs for thousands of dollars, but also you can make a big punt in your real life and not see danger. It's almost like I don't see danger. There's no danger anywhere. Yes, I put all that money into investment and everything's got an upside. And yeah, it's interesting. I feel like when you think about risk aversion, it's almost like you've magnified the downside and you've lost sight of the upside. Or the downside seems worse than the upside's willing to give you, and there's like an imbalance there. So you're not willing to take the risk because you're like, oh, it could hurt too much or I could lose too much, and you miss the kind of upsides. Whereas people who have no risk aversion or risk takers almost see the inverse. They see all the positives. I can't lose here. Let's go for it. And as you mentioned, in poker, that can get you closer to a equilibrium or a more advanced strategy. But in your other life, it can definitely create problems there as well. So yeah, there's so many angles to cover for you because I know you've had such a long career in poker. I want to just talk through your story, kind of gravitate through the main chapters for you, how you were a player yourself, and then also how you've ended up being a coach. So for you, in terms of what gravitated you towards poker originally, when did you stop playing other card games, and when did poker become your main love?
When I started playing poker, I was saying forced is a little bit too strong, but almost forced by two friends who already knew it existed, and they thought I would be doing great in poker because I was doing well in Magic, and they thought that I could become a very successful poker player. But honestly, I didn't find it interesting at all. And I always say that I'm extremely, I call myself neat all the time. I'm very risk averse, but for me, just pledging the game the right way is like the only way to reduce risk, right? Which usually means bluffing in very unlikely scenarios and all that. And I just wasn't very happy, I'm talking about 2005, okay? So, I mean, today is laughable, but back then, putting money in an online site from Spain where I did names that I hadn't ever heard of felt weird. I was studying at the university, so I didn't have any money. Like 100 euros for me was like all my budget for the month, something like that. I was living at my parents' back then. So they had to push me quite hard. And early on, the only reason I was playing poker was to try to make some money to play more magic tournaments, because I couldn't afford even traveling to compete more Magic because it was expensive. I had to study and everything. But like after 2 months, I started studying the basic math behind it. It was limit hold'em, so mind you, it was like the math was simpler because obviously it's a simpler game. It's important to be very precise in limit hold'em, but it's a simpler game. And I was making quite a bit of money. Those were like back in the like the tables were soft as shit, and I started playing like cents. But the second month I played, I remember making 11,000 in my second month, which for me that was a crazy amount of money, and that was the moment where I said, okay, let's rethink this for a moment, because I was playing Magic Online when I was playing one table. Back then, it wasn't even possible to multi-table online in the first sites that were offered. Then I found Party Poker, which was the big site back then, and they offered the option. I think they started with 4 tables, and then you could open 8. And at that point, I was like, okay, shit. I know people take that for granted now. You can multi-table like almost like crazy, but I was playing one table and playing Magic at the same time, and I still made more than 10,000 in my second month. So when I saw that I could be playing 8 tables, I think I started with 4, but I could play 2 sides or something like that. I don't even remember all the details, but I could be multi-tabling. So I said, okay, maybe I should be taking this seriously. I was like going up the stakes quickly, and at that point, I decided to give it a serious try. I had to tell my parents because I had exams coming up for university. I was in my last year, so they didn't take it well, but that put a lot of pressure on me to be successful. I mean, to make a huge effort to be successful, because like my family was mad at me. I had to leave. I was putting my university studies on hold, which is something like, it was like a crime for my parents. So I tried very hard to be successful. And on the first year and a half, I'd say I was playing and studying almost every single hour of every single day.
Wow. Yeah, take us back to that period, because I think you mentioned you were grinding like a madman when you fully committed. It feels like maybe to prove to your family that you're going to make it work, prove to yourself you're going to make it work. You've kind of went all in on poker and you want to kind of make sure you haven't made the wrong choice. So when you were kind of committed like this, were you driven by maybe a fear of failure? Were you trying to prove something? What was kind of that initial drive to grind like a madman and basically not have any spare time?
I'd say it's a mixture of things. Obviously, fear of failure, it was one of them. I remember thinking that worst case scenario, I could take a free year. So I had never had any trouble with my degrees or my studies. So it would have been that bad. So it kind of settled me down a little bit to give that a try. Also, like, I didn't grow up in a rich family. Poker opened the door to a degree of freedom because, like, even back then, I used to think about income as freedom, like, which to me is very related because you can choose what to do more if you have a good income. So for me, that was extremely valuable. So I was very motivated because I valued freedom very, very, very highly. It was very easy for me. It was like the natural thing to do because I saw a window where I could find that freedom that I didn't knew any other path to. And once I felt able to do it, because I mean, I was very successful early on. That was lucky. Obviously, that's a big part of it was variance. Certainly, I was playing one table. The tables were soft. My win rate for sure was great because people, like, I mean, I don't think you can imagine what those tables back then were. I'm talking about low or mid stake, limit call them back in 2006 tables, right? So it was very easy to get motivated. And then after not so long, this was Spain in 2006 and 2007. There was a very big crisis here. So my friends, they couldn't find a job. And one of them, the guy who I said was very risk prone, he came asking for like, okay, teach me a little bit so I can do that because he wouldn't be able to find anything. And he started also winning. So it started with like 2, 3, and suddenly I had like 25 people wanted to get in because they couldn't find a good job. So we hired an office, and that's how I started coaching and teaching other people. And even back then, I remember thinking that I enjoyed that way more than I enjoyed playing for long hours.
What was it about coaching that you enjoyed?
That I was helping others. Like, although my brain is wired in a way where the emotional side and the rational side, it's easy for me to separate them. I'm a very emotional person. And one thing that I don't love about grinding is that you don't get to interact with people, especially online. And you aren't doing something that's useful for other people. Like, okay, let's shoot for a moment that I'm the best grinder ever. So I'm destroying people at the table. Okay, all I'm doing is taking more money out of their pocket. I mean, I'm not stealing it. I'm not doing something wrong. But if I was just an average player, for them, the experience would even be better. And I'm not, let's call it, improving the world by that much. And while if I'm teaching others, they are going to, like, if I give them a way to earn a living, that's improving their lives. And it feels very different for me. I guess that's mostly it. I felt way more happy by seeing close friends doing final tables at TPTs or stuff like that than by my own personal success at the tables. Like, money comes in very handy. I'm very glad I found poker because it's allowed me and my family to live a very relaxed lifestyle. But the emotions I felt, it's never been stronger than when I've seen people I've been close with be successful.
Yeah, I think as well, it shows that as humans, yes, we want to have our own success, but we also want to be connected to other people, and we want to have that kind of shared journey and interact with people. Obviously, there's some people who are very introverted who might just one player mode the game of life forever. But most of us we don't want that long term. We kind of want to get ourselves in a good position, but we also want to create value to others, value to the world, value to our communities. And it sounds like for you that was quite a strong pull quite early. I'm curious to know about the time when the Spanish market got regulated. I think at this time was a tough period for you, and you had to go between the UK and Spain. Take us back to that period. What happened and how did you navigate that challenge?
It feels like it was the hardest period of my life because lots of things were going around back there. Okay, so at that point, I had already been playing online for maybe a decade or 8 years at least. And honestly, I can remember like my worst run while playing online. It wasn't even that bad. I've been blessed with, I guess, overvariance in my online career. So it was never that bad, maybe a few bad weeks, something like that. In that moment of time, the company, like it started with my friends, it became a company, like the poker school, and we have the point, everything poker related online in Spain, we kind of did back then. Today we even do more stuff, right? But the law passed, and that means that Spanish players could no longer access the shared liquidity, like the .com liquidity. So all of a sudden, it was only Spanish players among themselves, which obviously shrunk the liquidity like crazy. It shut down the investments of all the companies because like licensing was expensive. They had to pay way higher, like a big share of the rake in taxes. So companies weren't investing in either the school, the new sites, or everything. So we needed our income. It fell over like maybe 70 to 75% from like 1 week to the next, all of a sudden, which is crazy. So we needed to do lots of layoffs, which was very stressful. Like my biggest partner back then, he decided he'd rather leave because he wanted to build something very big, and it was not possible in the actual environment anymore. So it was lots of pressure that way. And also suddenly I couldn't play poker from Spain because, well, I couldn't be against a Spanish player. I was playing when there was high stakes back, and that also stopped. So suddenly I was like, okay, I don't even know what to do anymore. I have to deal with the emotional part of firing 30 people, which we were working together for years, which I didn't want it to, but you kind of had to. It was very painful. I decided to try playing online by going to United Kingdom, but my family, my wife was here, and it was crazy. I was stressed all the time. When I was in London, I felt like I needed to make up for the lost time without grinding, and the company was losing money, so I felt like I needed the income. I see now that my approach was kind of wrong because it was too short-term focus back then, but I also feel like there were so many things going around at the same time where it was difficult for me to find the inner space to relax. I destroyed my sleep patterns, which is something that I will never advise anyone to do. Don't do that, guys. That's criminally bad for you, for everything. I also learned about sleep a lot back there because my performance was like the worst it's ever been. I think it was barely breaking even or winning for like, I don't know, maybe 100,000 hands. That's maybe the worst stretch of my career. And when I was back in Spain, I studied my hands because when I was there, I only wanted to play because I could only play from London, right? So I came back and I studied my hands, and I found so many crazy mistakes, like what the fuck I am doing here. So it teach me a lot about how important it is to sleep and to take things easy. Things finally settled down once the company was, let's call it, resized, and it was at least stopped losing money. So that's when I started playing Zoom because it was easier to record and easier mentally for me to manage.
Yeah, that seems like a very stressful period of your life, and it sounds like you got into almost like the mindset of putting out short-term fires. You were flying to England to grind, make money, flying back to Spain to run the business, put out fires there, flying back to England. It must have been a very disruptive part of your life, and I can imagine like sometimes when stress is high, you do run to the immediate. You said your mistake was thinking too short-term, but I do think it's a kind of common thing when stress really peaks and we don't know what to do, we start thinking more short-term. We have to almost like navigate the choices. So you mentioned sleep was very disrupted and you learned how much sleep impacts performance. Anything else you learned about yourself during that stressful period?
Yeah, the time is just a stress eater. I put myself quite a lot of weight back then, which is like obviously another mistake. Like I noticed that I didn't back then, but it was difficult to. You go to a different city where when I was living here, I used to play basketball. I was in a team, which I had to stop doing that. I didn't find the time or the willpower maybe to take breaks, to go to the gym or stuff like that, because I felt that I didn't have the time to, because I only have 14 days to grind. I need to grind all 14 of them because I will be back to Spain and I won't be able to do that. So, and I can tell everyone that's listening here, take good care of your body and your habits because it will impact your performance like crazy.
Yeah, it sounds like a coming together of factors. like the economic factors and then the opportunity factors. And it feels like maybe in Brazil, there's similar things happening in Brazil in terms of the amount you can make in money online playing poker seems very high compared to other opportunities there, which creates a lot of demand for young people coming into it. You've also got good schools there, which are also having that kind of similar melting pot.
It makes sense that if your economy is not too good, but the education system is good enough, and you have good connectivity and a community, that's a great mixture to bring good players. I'm guessing the most developed countries have a lower incentive to start poker when you're child.
Playing solid poker pre-flop has become easier than ever thanks to free charts available over at GTO Wizard. However, in the games that you are playing, there's probably 1 or 2 players splashing around, completely changing what the correct pre-flop strategy would be. The real edge pre-flop is not in knowing the charts, but it's in knowing how to adjust, and if so, in which direction. Now that's exactly what GTO Wizard's latest upgrade was built for. You can now input exactly what it is your opponents are doing pre-flop and have GTO Wizard instantly show you what the most profitable adjustment would be. Take this following example. We are raising first in from the cutoff, and instead of Button being a chart guy, he is playing way more aggressively as he is looking to get unstuck. Once we input this into GTO Wizard, we can see that we should adjust our strategy by opening significantly tighter, and when Villain does make the 3-bet, which we kind of expected, play back aggressively by 4-betting almost twice as much, jamming all in sometimes, and calling almost all other hands that we decided to open. Or this example, we are on the button first in, and instead of having a pro in the small blind who follows the charge, we have a recreational player who is calling way too much, reducing our pre-flop fold equity. Surprisingly, GTO Wizard does not mind the overcalling that much, only slightly tightening up his pre-flop raising strategy, as it's still going to see a flop and then realize its equity. However, if the small blind plays back wider by 3-betting, this is when we have to make some serious adjustments, only opening the button 29%, as due to Villain 3-betting we can no longer realize our equity and post-flop advantage. Poker is a dynamic game, and so should be your pre-flop strategy. Upgrade now to GTO Wizard's Ultra Plan and adjust your way to the top. Use code MECHANICS to get 10% off. A link in the description down below.
So for you, poker was never about reaching the highest stakes. I think you mentioned earlier that you wanted the freedom from poker, like the kind of financial freedom from the income, and then to be able to have fun and enjoy your life. But you've stayed around poker and you've consistently evolved and coached players. So for you, how has your relationship with poker changed, and what's been driving you as you've kind of climbed the ladder, your own ladder of financial kind of abundance? And yeah, what kind of drives you now to coach poker players and to still stay involved?
It's usually never one single motivator. One of them is to help people be successful in an area where I feel I can actually help them. I guess if I could be like, let's say, I don't know, a heart surgeon that saves lives and gets handsomely paid for it, I might, but that's not in my skill set. So, I mean, it's something I can't do, but I can help people get better. I feel useful doing so, and that's like an important part of it. I also want, like, how do you explain kids that you are helping other people while you are playing poker? That's difficult. I kind of touched it before, but teaching others is something that I can be proud of, and that's a good way to make the world a better place. Like, it's not all of us can be superheroes, right? But making the world a better place in some regards, it's something that I value highly. And again, money is important because it brings you freedom. Like right now, I'm living in Spain, and I can choose to do that because I made enough. A mixture of things, right? I invest in playing poker or whatever, but where I can choose where to live, if we need to move, we will. And I have lots of time to spend with my kids, which I value more than anything else poker has ever provided me. Like after they finish school until they go to bed, I'm with them every single day, almost every single weekend. And that's something I value greatly. And by the way, will be a challenge now, like in the near future. As like next week, well, I guess when this podcast comes out, I will already have played in Paris, but that's going to be also something like challenging. The way I've managed my family relationship, I'm not used to being far away from them. Like I don't think I've ever been away for more than 2 days or something like that. So that's now going to be a new challenge for us. But I also feel that to an extent it's not bad for them to see that I go to places to do work, because that's something that they might need to do in the future. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like a lot. You were speaking there about being like a good role model, teaching by example, and just showing your kids that you're contributing, teaching people, giving value out there. I was wondering how much, is there any similarities you've noticed between raising kids and teaching students? I'm sure there must be some sort of crossovers in terms of almost like teaching lessons. Have you noticed anything that you've maybe gained from being a coach that you've been able to embed into your children?
That's it. I have never thought of it that way. So I am going to think about it a little bit, but I think it's not so easy to make a correlation, because my college perception is that kids learn mostly but by what you do, not by what you say or what you like. Well, the only important thing is how you act when you are with them. And they will pick even the little things about your actions, but telling them what to do is not very useful. Like maths, for instance. Obviously, no one learns math by just, see how someone acts. You need to actually understand it in a different level. It's not something social, but something intellectual. In poker, the intellectual part, I don't think you'll teach the same way you can teach a 3-year-old kid how to interact with other 3-year-old kid. Will learn by seeing you, the way you act, the way you talk, the way when something upsets you, what's your reaction. That's what he will learn, no matter what you say to him. But maths, or like how to estimate the EV of a given hand in the river, like I don't think you learn it that way. But the same way, if I am trying to teach my almost 11-year-old kid how to make a difficult multiplication or whatever, he's not going to learn if I just do the multiplication and give him the answer. I need to explain it to him. The part that could maybe be helpful is the emotional side I talked about. Even the players I coach, when they are successful, I also try to, maybe help them, or at least explain my point of view about other stuff like financial advice or other kind of life advice. And in that regard, maybe a little bit more. And for grown-ups, when you are trying to explain less social and more theoretical, that's something you need to study. It's like a different part of the brain.
What would be 2 or 3 things that you hope your children pick up from you, from observing you? Any sort of character traits or attributes that you feel you want to live so that they see you doing it, so that they can install that themselves?
Okay, one would be that like being kind and helpful to others is not weakness, but it's actually the smart thing to do to offer you good things in the future. The second thing is like to not make big financial decisions based on short-term impulse, like to have basic financial knowledge. The third one, to have a healthy lifestyle, like exercising, eating healthy, and I think and sleeping well. Those 3 things, I think, are absolutely key to any happiness.
Perfect. Yeah. So the lifestyle, looking after yourself, being healthy. You mentioned helping others there, and then good financial decisions, or how to at least think about long-term consequences of financial choices.
That's it. Yeah. At least think about the long-term stuff before you take financial decisions.
What happens with people who struggle with that? Obviously, you're doing a good job of being a good role model for your kids. People who don't think about the long-term consequences. Because the way I look at life, a lot of people's problems are caused by thinking very short-term. Short-term decisions around food, short-term decisions around money, short-term decisions around everything. Whereas if they just stopped for like a day and looked at the long-term consequences of their decisions, they'd very quickly go, that's not where I want to go. But a lot of people kind of struggle with that kind of connection with the long-term vision. So for yourself, it feels like you've been quite good at this throughout your life. What are some of the things you gravitate towards to be more long-term focused rather than short-term?
Honestly, that's something I've thought often about, because I'm unsure about if that's something you can actually teach, or if it's just all of it is just about how long you can delay gratification, right? Like I know they do like experiments with kids where they tell them like, okay, there is a candy or whatever in here. If you wait for an hour, I will give you 2. And some kids can wait for the full hour with no big issue, and some others just can't. They will stuff the candy into their mouths, right? If that's happening to 3, 4, 5-year-old kids, there is always the trap of getting the gratification now and taking later in every regard of life, in every, like any area you can imagine. If you are that kind of person, you will be stuck in a situation where you are barely able to pay your debts, and you can't even change your professional career because you can't afford to not keep working because you need to pay your debts. And no matter what amount of money you get to inherit from your family, whatever, you can always burn through it quickly because there is always the next big thing you can buy. That's why some people can bring down a family fortune so quickly, because okay, there is always the next big thing you can buy. You can always spend more, and there is like, if you have that inside you, I don't even know how to manage. And I've talked about the consequences. Well, not the 2-year-old, okay? The 3-year-old, let's give him a few years. But I talked a lot about them, about the consequences of doing that. But honestly, that's something you came very wired in from very early on. If you can delay gratification or you can't. And I guess I see that when they grow up even longer. Right now, my older, I'd say he's, let's say, okay with that, but not great. But the 7-year-old, he's amazing with that. He can delay stuff like forever. And he's been like that since he was very little. So I wonder how much of that is just dumb luck, right? Like genetics or whatever you can. I mean, I'm kind of explaining the same stuff to both of them in that regard. And actually, you could guess that the older one has an edge there because like he's older, so he could get more self-confidence. I mean, he's not terrible at that. It's not like something very worrisome, but we'll see, right? I guess we'll see. I doubt that's something you can actually teach.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reflecting as you were speaking there, and I feel like on some levels I've learned to delay gratification more and more as I've got older. I feel like when I was younger, I was quite impulsive, especially when I was very young. I was kind of, give me the candy now, give me that kind of short-term pleasure. And I very much seeked the short-term, kind of dopamine and pleasure circuits. Then as I got older, I started to see through those kind of games in terms of where they led to. So almost like we learned through feedback loops. When I realized that the short-term decision didn't get me where I wanted to, I could start to say, this doesn't work, what's wrong here? And then I started to align with longer-term kind of visions and goals and delaying gratification and seeing the benefits of that, kind of the work hard to get that outcome. For me, that started to crystallize around 15, 16 when I was a runner, and I used to have to sacrifice going out with my friends to train on a Sunday morning when everyone else was doing fun stuff, and then I would finally run faster in races and go, oh, if I delay the gratification, do the hard thing, I get the rewards. I think sports actually a really good teacher for kids to learn that hard work.
I strongly agree with that. It's very good for them to have something where they need to put long-term effort and see results. That's a great tip.
Yeah, maybe if I could relay my own experience, it would just be to find something that you can do that links effort to outcome over time, that you can learn by example of, when I did this and worked hard at it, I got better and it was worth the effort. Boom, you just need to find that example for yourself, because if not, we all have pulls. Like right now, we all have a pull for something short term that will make us feel good in the moment. Then there's the long term goals that require consistency, discipline, hard work that we're going to have to delay those short term comforts for. So we need to prove to ourselves that it's kind of worth it. Obviously, as you mentioned, different tendencies. Certain people have stronger pulls for that short term gratification. But yeah, I think it's something to always think you can improve on. I'm kind of optimistic at heart, where I always feel like if you want to improve, you can. Maybe there's some limitations there, but if you want to, there's a path. You just need to take action towards it.
Well, like obviously you're like, that vision is more optimistic. I don't know for sure. I mean, I'm not positive that's something you can't learn or improve. I think we can improve in many areas. Just there are a few things that I feel are more like connections that happens in your brain. Like why some people get addicted to gambling, which I know it's like a complex topic in the poker world, but some other just won't. What's the difference? Is something that, can they improve it? Or they can't? I honestly don't know. Like I don't have the answer for that, but it happens to some people, and I guess if they could choose, it wouldn't, right? So
yeah, I guess that's like when the reward centers are so stimulated, they feel so much of a pull to the behavior, it becomes very addictive, whether it's drugs, whether it's porn, whether it's gambling. There's certain things that can have on certain profiles of people a very, very, very strong pull. And that means the path to kind of pushing against that, because anything something's pulling you one way, you need to learn to like kind of pull the other way, or to not be pulled around by that. It takes a long time, obviously, for anyone to overcome those addictions. I think every addiction would need to be approached from a self-awareness lens. I feel if you just literally spend whatever problem you've got in life, you spend 3 to 6 months on reflecting on it and really understanding it, building self-awareness around it, it'll be solved. It would just be solved. Like, self-awareness is like puts a magnifying glass on it and illuminates what you were doing wrong, that it wasn't taking you where you wanted to go, and your problem like almost like disintegrates. Like a light gets shone on the problem and the problem kind of fades away. So yeah, I think obviously it's tough, because when you have to do that kind of work, it's not easy. That's why most people don't work on themselves. It's easier to scroll your phone, go on social media. But if you actually have a problem in your life and you spend 3 to 6 months on examining it, you'll make a lot of insight. So yeah, there's so many angles there. I want to pass over to Rene now, because I know you guys want to go deeper into the technical side. Rene, for yourself, in terms of the marshmallow test, as a kid, were you the guy who could wait an hour, or did you eat the marshmallow straight away?
Eat it straight away, my friend. Eat it straight away. No, so actually, I was thinking about this, and I think the most important thing is that you need a reason. Like, for me, to try to improve something, like, I think it all came after poker, because poker gave me a certain necessity, especially earlier in my career. I made a lot of bad choices, and therefore I was in big makeup, and I was in a situation where I was like, okay, I got to make this work, right? There's no other option. So the necessity was high. There was a big reason. And then you start to like, okay, so if I don't do this, then this will go better. If I do this, and then, it becomes quite automatic. But before that, like, I was living a very comfortable life. So there was no necessity. There was no reason. Like, why would I not eat the marshmallow, right? There's no big upside to not eating the marshmallow. There's no big downside to eating the marshmallow. So you need to, at some point, make that link between like, okay, the fact that your efforts, they have an influence, or the fact that you delay this, you get something better later, And I think when that falls, then at some point it's like, And I do agree that for certain, the baseline where you start from, for certain people is easier, for certain people is harder, right? Just because the way our dopamine system is regulated.
It makes sense. That's something that you can work on, I guess, But it's obviously different for each brain. Like
for sure.
The starting point, and maybe even the finish line where you can get to, I don't know.
Yeah, that's actually how I see it with everything. I think Adam probably agrees with this. Like, you can change anything, you can become good at anything, bad at anything, but the place where you start is different. And I agree that the finish line, based on certain things, are different as well.
I don't think all of us can be Picasso. Like,
no, yeah, exactly.
With my brain, like, to be very chance to like. My drawings are worse than my 7-year-old.
But if you would put all your effort into that for a couple of years, you could become a pretty okay drawer. You would not be Picasso.
I certainly took lessons, and I was always awful. I'm not sure about it. Like, try for a second imagining drawing something that you are not seeing. Like, the process for people is like to see it in your head, and then to make a copy of what you're seeing in your head. I was able to learn techniques. So if you tell me that in order to make a shade, I just need to do whatever things in order, I could do that. But I could never be able to make a good draw of something that I didn't have right in front of me. So I don't want to be the pessimistic guy here when I say that I think there are limits, but I don't think it's also a good thing to tell people, like to tell kids that all of you can get to be, let's say, Messi or LeBron James or whoever you want to, because that's not realistic and not true. It's not like you can get better at soccer for sure. You can get better at basketball for sure. Can you be the best ever to do it? Man, like, that's not realistic. That's like, there are millions of people trying, and there are components out of your control, like genetics, that will play a role on things. So I'm more on the middle ground, where it's good. Like you said, Adam said something that I found very important or very interesting, and is that having self-awareness, which means knowing what you are good at and bad at, it's very helpful in life. It's something that very early on you can't have. You don't even know. Like, you can't ask a 7-year-old to be very self-reflective. But what's that for you? Like, it's impossible. But I think that comes with the age. You know more about yourself, about how you function, what you do better, what you do worse, what kind of works for you, and it will be extremely helpful to make good decisions for you in the future. So, like trying to consciously make an effort to know more about yourself, I think it will always pay off in the long term. So, like I strongly agree with that. In poker terms, it means that I don't think everyone can be the best crusher in high stakes if he puts the effort. I don't think that's feasible.
Yeah, I guess we have to add also to that how the people learn is different. Maybe there's someone out there who specializes for people with your condition, with your way of seeing things. Maybe there's someone who specializes in teaching these people, you know. So I guess also we have the starting point that's different, we have the finish line is different, and how you get to the finish line for everyone that's different as well. But I believe everyone can at least, you know, make some progress in there. Maybe I'm projecting here because basically how I was raised, my mom thought it was a good idea to be realistic and lower my expectations, and therefore I kind of interpreted this as like, okay, you're not good at anything, so let's just settle for you know. So that's how a child can interpret this. So I'm maybe more on the flip side, and like with my daughter, like you can do anything, you know. Don't let anyone ever tell you cannot do anything. You can become whatever you want, you know. Maybe I'm compensating here.
Like all I say my kids is that they should try to be the best version of themselves they can in whatever motivates them, in whatever likes them.
Yeah, that's
for me that's good enough. Like I just think that comparing to others, it's never that useful. I mean, the market sometimes will, like if you aren't good enough at something, the market will kick you out and you won't make any money, right? The market will always have a say in stuff, at least in stuff that you sell to others. Sell in the most wide sense of the expression, right? If you are the work market for whatever, you are an engineer or whatever it is, an architect. Okay, if you make a great living from it, it means you did great, good job. But you can always compete with yourself. You should strive to be your best version and forget a little bit like, okay, maybe there is a genius in that area that's fine. You can still do great things, and being the best version of yourself is way less frustrating, because if you strive to be so Messi, let's say, if you strive to be Messi and you just manage to be a great soccer player because you are lucky enough with your body type and the injuries and everything, and you make a great living from it, you can still feel frustrated because you didn't achieve the amount of success that Messi did, which is extremely unfair because there is like one of a million. But you can always focus on your effort, be the best version of yourself. And if you are doing that properly, you should feel great with yourself because you are trying to become a better version of yourself. Effort, being smart about how you choose to apply your effort. I think that part is important and it's sometimes left out. But that, let's call it combination of things, I think that's what leads you to the best version of yourself.
Right now, actually, I want to take it back to poker a little bit, because you know you've been in poker for 20 years now, and you know always with guests, I try to think like, okay, what's something unique insights that this guest can give us? And you know, you've seen the game evolve through several eras, right? Different metas. I think I've heard you use the word metas quite often. Mm-hmm. Different study methods, different player pools. What are the biggest strategic shifts you remember? Moments where the game fundamentally changed over like the last 20, 25 years? You already mentioned like a common meta, like around the risk aversity, for example. But if you just think back, how big moments of strategical change?
I'm going to only focus on no limit hold'em, because like if we go to the limit era, like 99% of the players won't even know what game we are talking about. And like obviously if you put any player of this era like back 10 years, they will absolutely destroy the tables to a degree it will be comical, right? And still basic mistakes are the same. So back very early on, people was always playing very, very passive and overfolding scenarios, but they were not very intuitive. They were overcalling in some other scenarios where the pots got bigger and they didn't have any bad hands in the range. So there were scenarios where you could bluff a lot early on in the hand and print money, but the pots grow bigger and they wouldn't know how to fold a big percentage of a stronger range. So you should be way more careful about bluffing in some other scenarios. So things where, if you were able to find the right scenarios, very polar back there. Many scenarios where you wouldn't ever bluff anything because very bad scenarios and very good scenarios. And also, ranges people used were way more, very different. Like players were less similar between them. At least, good players, right?
Mm-hmm.
There were a big difference in winning players back then. Like there were players that were opening 80%, or I remember one that was opening 100% in the bottom for years. I was always having so much fun, because I was 3-betting literally any two against him, but no one else was doing that. So it was very, very fun. Nowadays, pre-flop ranges for most people are just all the same, so the game is way more standardized today. So similar situations happen more times. So it's more frequent to find yourself in the same situation, because back in the past, it's very different how you want to approach a scenario where you've defended the big blind against a guy who's opening 25% on the bottom, or a guy who's opening 70% on the bottom, right? So spots were wildly different, and you needed to be more flexible in those spots, even more flexible. But on the other hand, people was trying to feel what you were doing. So they were more prone to adapt, even with many limitations and lack of knowledge back then. Also, sizings. So I remember when overbets became a thing, because before that, you would see an overbet once it's 10,000 hands, and it was likely a misclick or something. And I remember when that, for a player that started in the last decade, for them, they wouldn't even understand what I'm talking about. But back in the past, that just didn't ever happen. And it also changed a lot. You remove overbets from the equation, you can materialize a lot weakest holding in bad runouts or in bad boards. So the strategy changes way more than you think, right? But there is a caveat here. If you played in the old ages, you know that there are exploits you can make against people who under overbets or overbetting. It's difficult. You really need to do it a lot, because the right thing to do in this meta is to do it quite often. But there are exploits that it can be very handy today that no one has ever studied if they started in the last 8 years, because they didn't grow in that meta, right?
I actually saw that in I think it was the high stakes Cash Game World Championship a couple months ago. Jasem Gill, he was still very very experimentative with sizing, one of the few high stakes that completely was doing something different than the rest pre-flop with some sizing. So it's pretty cool to see that there's definitely still players, and I've heard some players talk about here on the podcast. If I ask, okay, well, what if you have to battle Linus tomorrow, and say, well, I'll probably just do something creative and try to drag them into a part of the tree that they don't know, and because I'm pretty sure that if I go in his side of the game, I'm gonna lose.
Well, yeah, I guess that's something that will give you, if you feel like an underdog, you are trying to change the rules of the game, right? That's buying the premise that they are better than you in the whole solver thing. Maybe you are not looking at the right place, because you are still looking at your game and trying to imitate it better instead of looking at theirs and trying to find the mistakes. That's my point with the solver approach that I rant about maybe for too long, is exactly that. Most even great players keep looking in their game if they feel their opponent is better, instead of trying to look in their opponent's game. And they get so used to at not even looking that you can survive to the most blatant things, and they won't look at them. It never occurred to me that betting 3 times the pot would be a good thing to do. It felt that it will give them a way too easier tool, and I was very wrong about that. That's one of the things that the solver world teaches me. So there are some useful things.
Yeah, I think it also helped you give at least a certain baseline of what's correct, because I remember I would in the past exploit things that I thought were wrong, and then in hindsight was like, oh wait, it doesn't necessarily just work like this. So actually what I thought I was exploiting was actually another leak. Okay, so it's good to have a new baseline now. I actually remember also, like, I think it was 2000 maybe 16 15 or something, when like not even like 10%, but just in general, like small c betting, like 20-30% pot. Before that was not a thing. I remember in the past we were just c betting half pot, 3/4. That was just the only buttons we used.
Half the pot was the way to go all the time, which funnily enough, it's almost never right, or I mean, almost never is maybe too much, but it's rarely right. But sizes were way more standard back then. Like, there were people who will always be the same size on the flop no matter what, and that's it.
I thought that
Also,
was balanced.
over c-betting,
I
over
open, I
c-betting
click
was very
3/4 pot, and I'm balanced, you know?
and let's go. Yeah. Like, how are they going to know what my hand is if I'm betting each one of them the same amount? Yeah. Like, obviously, but we are going, like, that's way back in the old days. Like, I think at these frequencies, like, not c-betting every hand every time, because like if you go to a live poker environment, but you can still find players that are just c-betting every hand every time. That wasn't so common. Like, not every player was c-betting every hand.
This may be a difficult question, but how do you come up with strategies? How does that process from an idea in your head go to like implementation and later teaching it to others?
Okay, it's complex, but for me, the way of when I'm trying to immerse myself in deep thoughts, like trying to go into complex things where it's a bit uncharted for me, I usually do it by talking with people. For me, it's easier to talk it out, and I don't know why I even looked for it, and I don't know if it's a thing, but for me, it's easy to think deep stuff when I'm laying down. Like, laying down on the floor, I can do that, which is a very weird thing to say, but I like to think about complex stuff, lying down on the ground and talking with people, which, if you mix both of them, it's even weirder, because I'm lying down in the middle of like the office we were sharing, and I'm talking with people who usually aren't lying down, because it's very weird, socially speaking, like to just lay down in the middle of a place. So I've done that a few times. Yeah, that will be like the way where I'm trying to solve something new where I'm unsure about the solution. That's my way to go about, like, at least for complex and technical stuff. The stuff that is complex for me, maybe it's not for others. When I'm expressing things out loud, I don't need to keep them in my head, so it kind of leaves room for new thoughts. It's extremely weird, I know, but it's the way it feels. It feels easier to keep producing new thoughts as I'm talking them out. And when I say them out loud, some mistakes or some things that I feel they are wrong, when you say it out loud, you can, okay, no, that might be a mistake, or there is something missing there.
That last point I can definitely relate with, like, especially when I started to do more coaching. You're just saying things, the same things, and then suddenly, or like a student would say, are you sure, Wacko? I'm like, actually, when I said that, it doesn't really sound right. So, like, just saying it out loud, and especially presenting it and teaching it to others, right? That's definitely, in my opinion, in my experience, the best way to test your ideas, right? And to get better at it. Actually, you already mentioned it at the beginning, but one thing that always stands out to me when it comes out to Spanish players is indeed this massive HUD. I think you mentioned it a little bit earlier in the beginning, but for me, that kind of the classic character of a Spanish player is like he has a massive HUD, the Educa HUD. I think you mentioned it all the way in the beginning. What is the real value of using a HUD properly?
It's easier for you to understand how the guy understands the game. I know it's a bit of a redundancy, but what you want to achieve is to see if that guy is someone who will value very thin in spots where it's not obvious, if he will overbluff or underbluff the close scenarios. He tends to lean more in a size for bluffs. Let's say you have a guy whose overbetting frequencies are on the high end, and his one-edged showdown when he overbets is on the lower end. That means that he's going to be in scenarios where it will be, let's call it theoretically sound, he will tend to lean with the overbet bluff quite a bit. So we doesn't, that also says something about his range, because like That's an important part, which is trying to think about the lines that weren't taken, if that makes sense. If he had a strong hand, that hand could have done different stuff at some point in the hand. And if you know the tendencies of that player, you can think about that way. And then you try to obviously build a strategy that will exploit him the most.
Yeah, I can definitely relate. You kind of follow it down the tree. I can see myself go to the set and like, yeah, but this hand doesn't go there because you don't play like that, or you represent this hand now, but you would have done something different. Any other ways of using data that you think has been very beneficial in your career and in your coaching, and also what you maybe recommend listeners to use?
There are, I don't know if it's one or two things, but they are very related, and it's like, I think I talked about it a little bit, like the meta, like the average, right? When you work with pools of data from pools of players, that can give you very useful insights, because since you are increasing the amount of opportunities of data you get, you can look for more detailed stuff, because you will get bigger sample sizes to check for more specific things, like some runouts or some which if you try to do that for a single player, it's always just full parias. There is nothing to useful to find there. It's important to pull the data from the right players. What I'm trying to say is that you don't want to mix all of the pool, and that can be challenging to do. Like, you want to not use recreational data to average them with the regulars. That's not useful for you, because against recreational players, which is, by the way, one of the things that I'm, let's call it, more specialized for. Well, when I get, I don't countless hours of coaching about how to play against recreational players. And the main reason is that everyone notices that playing solverish against them is pointless. That's very easy to notice. But at the same time, the adjustments can vary very wildly, right? That's why you want to pull them out of the data, because it will kind of corrupt some data. But I think that's very useful, because it allows you to go in more detail about a very specific situation, like flops, like the specific ace, king, 7 flop. Okay, what happens here in ace, king, X when we overbet the turn? What's the success we actually get that? Because the theory will do that quite often. It doesn't tell you how the actual pool will react, and no data you use in a hand will be helpful for that. But you can check the averages, so that's useful too.
What about looking at your own data?
Oh well, I do that all the time. That's very important for me and for students, because first you look at your own hand to check for spots to work on. Like, if you see a stat that will feel like you are, I don't know, racing too much here or too little or fall, whatever it is, that's a good point to focus your next topic, your next area of work. And that's useful on its own, because there are so many situations that you can work on this game, that just being able to focus on where to look next, like, obviously having your average value of some stat reach a value, it's meaningless. What you want is to play each hand to the best of your capabilities. But seeing what the averages of your game are can help you identify mistakes you aren't noticing. And that's very useful. But the hand, I do a lot, and I love to review hands using the right filters to check if I'm making mistakes on a given situation. Maybe I'm under bluffing on a scenario because for whatever reason, or over bluffing some scenarios, and just identifying those is very useful.
It also kind of starts at the self-awareness part, right? That we talked about earlier, how important it is. If you look at your own data, at least you have a starting place. Oh, this is on average how I look, right? This is where I lean towards. It's funny when we were talking about the difference between playing poker more based on your own strategy or your opponent's strategy. I recall two very successful poker players, both retired, both made millions playing poker. And one was in a very long downswing, and he said, I looked at all my stats and I couldn't find anything wrong. And the other one was like, why would you look at your stats? The only stats that are important are your opponent's stats. So you could see both very successful players, but both had a completely different orientation. One was way more focused on do I play well? And the other guy's like, I've never looked at my own stats. I'm just looking at my opponent's stats. I make my opponent ever play based on my opponent's stats. So my stats don't matter. So it's funny to see how, you know, different ways can still lead to success.
I don't think your stats are like a goal. You shouldn't aim to have the perfect stats. It's just a way to try to find the next spot to work within your game. I like working spots 1 or 2 at a time, so I can focus on them while I'm playing. Like, let's say I'm working on, I don't know, raising the flop C bet, let's say, whatever. I'll try to be very aware of each opportunity I have of raising the flop C bet and focus on that, because that's what I've been working with recently until it becomes more automatic, so I don't have to think about it that much. But for maybe a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it depends on how deep the topic is. I'll try to focus my attention on that, like especially focus my attention, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think it also just helps you not autopilot, right? Helps you stay engaged in the game, and obviously tracking your data and looking afterwards is the best reflection in terms of, well, did I actually do it? Did I actually do it often enough? Oh, yeah, you just look at your old data compared to your new data. Oh, I did raise more flops, so you know it was a success. You recently joined PokerStars Team Spain. I think you already mentioned a little bit earlier. I see you rocking the PokerStars sweater, which means more live events and more tournament play. I know you more as online cash game specialist, but found out you have also influenced various MTT players in the world. When did you develop an interest for tournament, and what drew you to them?
Okay, I like, from an intellectual standpoint, I was interested in tournaments very early on, like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years after I started playing cash. That's like a very challenging model, and I love the idea. The thing is that playing tournaments for a living, I think it brings you to a way harder lifestyle. Like with cash, it's easier to decide for how long you are going to play, which days, which hours work better for you, especially if you can move to a different time zone, then it's extremely easy. In tournaments, it's crazy because it depends on the schedule. When like any big series like Scoop or whatever comes, you have to be grinding like crazy for days, and it can get very long and very exhausting. So I never wanted to seriously do it because I felt like my lifestyle was going to be way better playing cash. But I thought a lot about the difference between cash and tournaments. Also, like in practical terms, there is a part about tournaments that I don't love, which is the fact that in many tournaments they are either very long or you get to a quite short stack pretty early in the tournament. So decisions get to be sometimes simplified when you are playing. I mean, there is always complexity in this game, but for me, playing 15, 20, 10 blinds is less interesting than playing 100, 200, 300 blinds. But honestly, about the ICM thing, I remember maybe 15 years ago thinking that, and I still do to this day, and I haven't been able to be convinced otherwise, that's kind of the wrong model to approach tournaments. And we'll see how it goes. I'm only going to be playing a few tournaments. Obviously, the sample size makes it very irrelevant, right? But I feel that the ICM model, it's very flawed in that you account for what will happen if a tournament ended this very hand. But the fact is that if you have the big stack and every other player at the table is going to play by the ICM rules, you are continuously going to be put in a situation where you are generating cheap EV, like more chips just because you have the big stack. So getting to that big stack is valuable because you will then be more situations where you get cheap EV, which will imply that when you have a medium stack, which is the worst to gamble because you have shorter stacks to pass, but like when you go all in against another guy, you are if you lose, you are eliminated. It would imply that doubling up there is more valuable because then you get the big stack and the whole ICM thing now will work in your favor in future hands, right? So the fact that you just slice the present hand picture and assume the value of the stacks based on like your probability of cashing in based on the stack, makes me feel like this is a very flawed model, and that at some point in the future, something different will come where it will soften the ICM model by a lot. I don't know if I will be into that when it comes out, but I always loved the theory about stuff. So I guess I will, if I'm still around the poker when it happens. But it's been 15 years at least since ICM model started. And as far as I know, it's still the predominant model in every solver that gets into tournament and the stuff. And I think it's extremely flawed. We'll see how it works for me. Because like my approach through those tournaments, and don't laugh at me, is going to be playing them like they were a cash game or very close to that. And it's just because, obviously for me, the money is not important. So there's a component there where cashing for me is not important. Also the component where I think having a big stack might have more value than it should, because other players will overfold in scenarios where they shouldn't. But also, for me, there is some value in making big runs, and for that you need chips. It's not about dollar EV, but about chip EV, because like I am going to be recorded. I will get to make content and more, let's call it, publicity for my school or my brand and everything else. For me, it kind of makes sense to play less ICM, even less ICM than what you normally would. But even tossing that aside, I really think that the whole ICM model is flawed. So we'll see about that. Maybe in a year after I played some more and I've had more conversation with Malaka or someone like him, maybe my approach is different. But right now, I'm pretty adamant about ICM being a mistake. Not the right approach to solving that.
My last tournament that I played, I think it was on the bubble, there was a guy with a t-shirt that said ICM is for poor people. I think it was something. I think it was something like that. And he lived his word, like button opened and he re-jammed I think he jammed like 25 blinds or something. Maybe even more from small blind with like king 6 suited or something like that. Very close, maybe like 8 off the bubble or something. And 25 big blinds was a good stack on the bubble. I don't know much about tournaments, but I looked at my right of a guy that I do not know and said, seems pretty loose. He represented, he said, yeah, he represented his shirt, right? So, it's definitely very interesting. For a strong cash game player switching to MTTs, what are like the biggest strategical adjustments they need to make? What should they be focused on? Obviously, like ICM, we already kind of talked about. You could throw that out the window, especially obviously in your case, right? Any other like strategic adjustments that are top of mind?
To be clear, I'm not saying that you should, like, if you want to play perfect tournament poker, it's not the same thing as playing a cash game in each, like, obviously very early on it's very similar or the same. There will be some adjustments, but I just don't think ICM is it's going to be the right answer for that. With that said, for me, there are two things. The main one is to, unless you usually play short stack cash game, is to refresh your short stack knowledge, because that's like where, and once like you go to the deeper stages of the tournament, most of the time the effective stack is going to be, depends a little bit on the tournament, but 20, 15, maybe 25 blinds. That's going to be the average stack size. And mistake, like when you play a tournament, it's extremely high variance, because the effective stackless, if you translate that to a cash game, you are increasing the stakes because players get eliminated. So it's time playing a higher stake because you are playing for a biggest percentage of the prize pool. So if you are playing a 10,000 tournament, your stack is worth 10,000 the very first hand of the tournament, right? But if like half the pool has been eliminated, you are now playing with a stack that's worth 20,000, but you don't have 100 blinds or 200 blinds. You might have 20 blinds. So you are playing very high stakes short stack poker. So working on your short stack game is very important, because that's where most money will be determined. If you want to seriously approach tournament, work on for a spin and go player, it might be easier because they will be very used to playing like 10, 5, 11, 14 blind situation. But for cash games, for cash game players, that area is usually very like, I don't know if confusing is the word, but it's very easy to make mistakes that are costing you like maybe 5 or 10% of a spot, right? So that's for me the key area. The other thing, it's like stamina. If you are going to be playing tournaments, you need to be sharp, especially if they are live tournaments with long structures. You're going to be playing for days, and you need to be sharp on day 3, day 4, day 5 if you make it. That's especially true for huge tournaments. Like you want to play the World Series of Poker main event. Okay, great. It's a very profitable tournament. It's a very fun thing to do at least once, but you should be ready to be playing 7 days for like 10 hours plus a day, which usually cash game players don't need to do or should they do. You shouldn't be playing online for that long, 7 days in a row. That's not a good approach to your long-term success. But if you are going to be successful in a tournament, you are going to have to play for many days, many hours a day.
Are you grinding hard, studying solvers, reviewing hands, but still not getting those results that you know you're capable of? You're putting in the time and effort, but without clear direction, that effort does not pay off. That is why I created the Mechanics League Buster program, which is the exact system I use to make over 7 figures playing online poker, and have since taught to hundreds of students so they could do the same. Through our League Finder stats and pop-ups, you will gain clarity on your biggest leagues and tendencies, insights on how your strategies have been performing in-game, and the impact variance has had on your results. But knowing your stats is only the beginning. In the program, we dig deep into the root causes behind your leaks and tendencies and use a proven 7-step system to fix them for good and gain the skills to improve and continuously evolve as a poker player. You'll study more effectively, overcome leaks and tendencies that felt impossible to break, and rebuild trust and confidence in your game, finally seeing your hard work pay off as you move up the stakes. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start improving with clarity, break through the patterns that have been holding you back, and take your game to the next level, join the Mechanics League Buster program using the link down below. And for the first month of enrollment only, you will get access to weekly group coaching calls with me and get a chance to win a one-on-one coaching session in which I personally review your game. So don't miss out on this limited opportunity. Join the Mechanics League Buster program using the link down below, and looking forward to seeing you guys in there.
You mentioned a few times like having like a different brain, and I'm curious to know for you, like obviously you've worked with a lot of people, myself as well, I've worked with a lot of different styles of people, and as I've experienced more interactions, you start to notice like people do think differently, they learn differently, they take in information differently. So for you, as you've been teaching students, is there any sort of, maybe we could approach from styles of thinking that are easy for you to teach, and maybe styles of people who are being more challenging for you to pass on knowledge to?
That's something that has caught my attention kind of, let's call it recently, in the last few years. So early on, I'd say no, I was just saying my shit and trying to explain my thoughts on things, and that's mostly it. Later on, what I've kind of the workaround around that I found works well is trying to share the coaching load with other people who will have different, at least slightly different styles, even though the general philosophy might be the same. The teaching styles might be different, and getting the feedback from the students about like which way is more helpful for them. It's very difficult for me to explain things on a very visual way because my brain is not wide like that at all. So I wouldn't be good at doing. I don't think I'd be good at doing that. But if I have other people who's good at doing it, I think at least for me that worked it like easier. So like right now we have 15 players that we are coaching right now at our school, whatever. But it's like three people teaching, and we don't have exactly the same style, even though we've shared many hours of thought processes or analysis. I think it's good to mix it a little bit, precisely because my style of thinking or teaching might be easier for some to follow than others. So this way, the students can kind of choose which teacher suits them best or helps them more. And maybe you ask, like when they ask questions, you can ask to whoever you like, and it's very easier for you to understand. So that's been kind of, let's call it my solution to that. Instead of like having me just going over 5 people that I'm exclusively working for them, we are kind of sharing the time and the studies, if that makes sense. I don't know if it makes sense the way I phrased it, but...
Absolutely, yeah. So rather than you trying to find different ways of teaching, you bring in different teaching styles into your environment, so like they can self-select what style suits them. And I think as we all have different styles of learning, and I think over time, hopefully you find the style that works for you, and you gravitate towards people who are teaching that style, so you can have like a frictionless path. I think one of the challenges is at school, we often get exposed to teaching styles that aren't our natural style, and they try to mold us into a very tight fit, and then we think we're not smart or a bad learner. And it's like, no, that's just style of teaching just is awful for me.
You just reminded me of the countless hours of teachers trying to make me doing like visual stuff to learn, and that never worked for me. I just wanted to read the fucking book and get done with. But yeah. I mean, I can relate to that. Now I understand why. Back then I didn't. Just like people was doing very neat things that were like, and I just wanted some writing phrases, and that was it.
You mentioned earlier that one of your skills is you pick up patterns, and then you also think in words. I'm trying to put myself into your brain for a second and picture how these patterns emerge. So for you, like how do you form these patterns, and do you feel like the skill of forming patterns is helpful for you as a poker player, or more as a coach in terms of how you've been able to use that skill set of pattern recognition?
Okay, I think it's especially useful as a player, but it's obviously useful for both things. I mean, coaching and playing are not the same thing, clearly, but there are lots of skill that overlap there. But I often find myself thinking, how likely is that this guy will try this line as a bluff here or as a value? And then I try going through other hands that he's played and the way he likes to get value from hands. If he's very balanced, then that's a different topic. But if he's very balanced, it's almost irrelevant if I decide to proof catch or not, because he's going to be very balanced. So it's going to be very close either way. But if I get to understand what his perception of getting the most value is in a given situation. There are players that love to go, for instance, the full value every time they can. So if they choose a line where most of the value hands will already be strong hands on the flop or have a good chance of being value hands on the river. This is an example, right? But he's chosen a line that where he could have put all the money in by betting different sizes on the flop or short, but he didn't. Then he's going to be way less likely to have a value hand on the river, because he went a path where his value hands would have started that way on the flop. Because if he's a guy that when he has a strong hand, he wants to find lines that allow him to play for all the money. He will rarely choose lines that would early on the hand that would make it difficult. But if the run out has changed a lot, and now the strong hands were a different kind of hands before, like the mid card pairs. So he had a mid pair, and now he might be betting small, and now he goes big with his value hands. That's a very different scenario where the strongest hands have kept the same, right? But if I know that that guy likes to play it bigger for value wherever it's theoretically possible to do so, you can reduce a lot of his value hands when the first scenario happens. In Spanish, it would have been way easier to explain that for me. In English, it's difficult. But did that make sense? What I tried to
It did,
explain?
yeah. The way I internalized that was your understanding how he thinks, and the patterns you're picking up on his method of thinking of where to extract value, how to play his range.
Yeah, but yes, what I'm trying to say is that for humans, there are humans that are if you're very, very studied in GTO and very, very balanced, whatever. Honestly, those are the people I need to care about the least. But still, they will be less balanced than what they feel they are. But okay. But for most people, when they get, let's say, value, right? There is a kind of thought that goes with them. If they like to trick with their value, which means that they like to underrepresent it in the early streets to get value later on, or if they like to play it big each time, which usually means that if they know they have a good chance to have value on the river, they usually choose lines that will make it easier to put all the money in or stuff like that. Once you know those tendencies from a player, sometimes you can narrow the range a lot when they do or don't do that early on. So you get to the river, and his range is more defined than what they will feel. So what eventually happens there is that some players, there are scenarios where you can identify situations where they have way less value than they should, but they are going to bluff as if they had that value there. Did that make sense? So they are usually over-bluffing the spot a lot, but they won't notice it easily because it's difficult to find the value combos that you think should be there, but actually it's not so likely that they got there because they wouldn't have done the same line in earlier streets. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. And yeah, I'm seeing your brain like kind of basically, you're in a spot understanding how they're playing at a higher level than they are in that moment. You've spotted the patterns of play and how they've arrived at that spot. And something's just like a red flag here or something's not making sense. And you've put them into a box where their range is different to what they're representing.
I tend to kind of have a specific hand that's simple to convey that idea, right? Last time I played live in a tournament in Malta, I went to Malta because I won it in a different event. I won an entry to Malta, so I went there, and I remember a hand where the sequence was check, 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 check. So and the river he checked, I bet small, and he shoved large, right? So obviously, when he takes a line like that, the theory will make him have some value hands playing 3 checks, so he can check overbet raise the river. But in order to do that without knowing much about me, he will need to expect me to be checking twice and then value betting enough hands in a drive run out that will call the big shove. That's not what the meta will ever do. So if your guy looks like a young player, like a smart live player, he's going to be very unbalanced there because his value hands that could check raise river against a guy he doesn't know. Like I look like an old man who has no idea about playing poker for most non-Spanish people. He's not going to be expecting me to be bet calling the river in that sequence much. Is he going to have the right amount of value combos triple checking there? I think that's very unlikely. So I don't know the guy that much, but he looked smart. He was confident the way he was moving at the table, so he knew what he was doing around the poker table. How likely is that he's balanced there? Are his value combos really going to be checking 3 streets against an unknown enough? I don't think they are, so I call that with 4th pair, right? That's the kind of thing where that you can try to find those kind of scenarios. I'm sure that guy knows a lot about GTO and is a very smart person. I have no doubts about it, but I pretty much question that he's ever going to be balanced in that line against an unknown.
Yeah, great example. I was going to ask you how wide would you call there, but 4th pair is pretty wide, so you extended your range pretty far. What was the most favorite part of your poker career? During your grinding years, what part did you enjoy the most?
A difficult one to ask because I don't associate grinding with joy, honestly. Obviously making money is amazing, but I felt more joy seeing some of my friends being successful than my own success, because I don't know why, but I felt that a big part of my success is just because it was easy for me. My brain was wired in a way where poker was easy. So I'm more proud of other areas of my life, my kids, for instance, raising them it's been challenging and I put a lot of effort into it. Or even having a company that I don't manage it. So managing sounds like a daily thing, but I make decisions to keep the company running. I've tried my best to do that for years now, but I feel happier about having friends making final tables in tournaments because I was so happy to see them do well than about my own. I kind of took it for granted quite early on, which is a mistake. I know it's a mistake, but I was so successful from very early on. I kind of, let's call it, knew or felt that I was going to do well in poker, which is, maybe it's a bit braggy to, I don't know, but I never doubted that I was going to be able to make money from poker once, I don't know, after the first few months.
That fits in with your goal though as well. When you mentioned you weren't really driven by playing higher, you were driven by the financial side of creating freedom. You were linking finances to freedom.
That was like that from the very beginning. It was always like that.
Which
And that's why I
skill-
don't feel the drive to play, like to grind anymore. Like I already have that, and I don't want to spend like countless hours of grinding just to. For me, there is no point in trying to compete with the best. I'd rather play Magic for that, which I love to.
Yeah, it just shows like poker fits different needs for different people, and for you, the
For sure,
competition
yeah.
to play and beat the best. Like at this stage of your life, there isn't that pull to do that. And if you did have the pull, you'd have to kind of go all in on it. And for the way your mind works, you enjoy the thinking about poker, the strategizing, and there's not really the strong pull to put that into practice in terms of grinding full time. So yeah, it's just an evolution in it, as you mentioned, self-awareness to understand yourself, the stage of life you're in, what's important to you. You like spend time with your kids, having that life balance, and that doesn't necessarily fit in with being a full-time grinder. So for you, what skill have you learned through poker that has been the most valuable transition into business or in your personal life?
For business, I'd say that in poker you are balancing risk reward. Like in every decision, it's like risk reward all the time, and thinking like that in business, it's useful in many contexts. Not in all of them, but in many contexts. Also, it helps you understand the difference between variables you can control and what you cannot control. In poker, there's clearly short-term results. It's a variable you can't control, which people act like if they do, but you actually can't control that. And that's an important mindset for business too. You do the best you can control, which is the way you work, the culture of your company, the way you like, the decisions you can make, and whatever happens, right? Like maybe you thought you were going to be successful in one area of the business which does not work. Okay, that's fine, and you just adjust, but you don't punish yourself, let's call it, because something didn't work out. You just focus on what you can do best, which is critical for poker.
You mentioned earlier your brain thinks well in probabilities. Has this been something that was natural to you growing up, as poker being like the vehicle to really fine-tune that skill? Because I know most people, poker players, generally learn that skill through poker, but maybe for you there was a kind of a pre-skill that you already had going into it.
Yeah, I think that's something I've had around. I mean, I wouldn't have verbalized it like that when I was a kid, but I was playing cards with my grandparent when I was 6. He was like the local card games in Spain, but he was like very well known in his like a small town, like the best player or the best player of some of those games, which were like games where you had incomplete information and betting, like you not money, but they usually played for like the drinks or stuff, which is the way it usually is. And like I remember me and my brother being maybe 8 years old, and he was very proud of taking us to some games with his old friends, like 65-year-old or 70-year-old people, and he was so proud each time we would beat them, because like he was like bragging to them about it for them. So that's been a part of my life since I was very young. When I grew a little older, I started playing other kind of games, like Magic was the one I played the most, but I played other card games or that kind of games, and I was always very successful from the get-go, which, I mean, there is a part of it that's, I wouldn't call talent. I'm not that a smart person. It's just that my brain is wired in a way where those games are, let's call it, easier for me. Like if we play a new board game with my friends, I will always win the first few games because it will be very easy for me to understand what the rules is. When I play a live game and there are different rules, like, live games, they usually, whatever it's the Squid Game, Mid Game, the 7 Deuce Game, or a billion different games that actually structurally change the game a lot, I feel like it's very easy for me to find the right changes to a game to try to optimize it, right? And that's been a part of me since I can think about, which is, I mean, it's not the right lesson to give to people. For me as a coach, it will be way better to say, no, that's something you can work your way up and get to that level or in those areas. But I guess if I also, like, I've improved a lot through practice, because since I was good at it and I liked it, my grandparent was like praising me, and I kept being good at it, and practicing it obviously helped me get better, right? So like, for sure, I'm not saying that practice is not useful, but it's been a part of my life. since I was 6. I'm going to say 6 because early on, at some point, I don't even know, right? So forever.
Is there anything that you notice that you pick up that other people miss when you're, like, say, learning a new game? Let's say you play a new board game or a card game with your friends and you said you would win the first few rounds, but then they might catch up. So that implies that maybe they would learn to spot what you've spotted, but you've spotted quicker. Do you think there's, like, commonalities in terms of just naturally the way your brain simplifies or things it picks up on that gives you an advantage there?
By seeing how who won or and how he won. So it's easier to imitate a strategy that worked than creating one of your own. For me, it's easy to think about a new strategy or a strategy of my own. It obviously also varies from game to game. There are games with more variance, with less variance. That's obviously about to happen. It's been always like that for me, which is a bit unfair. I know there isn't much I can do about it, but I was born like that, or I got that from very young, and it's always been a part of me. So I guess that's why I kind that took for granted that I will do okay at poker. And I never even questioned that it wouldn't be like that, because it's kind of my identity, right? So I wouldn't even know who am I if I wasn't good at games, because that's one of the things that defines me since forever, since I was 5, I don't know.
Yeah, that tempted me to open up a new rabbit hole with identity, but I'll leave it there. You clearly have a very...
Yeah, maybe the identity wasn't the right word. Yeah,
yeah, no, it is. It's very much the right word, but it's a loaded topic for me. But yeah, you obviously have a very unique brain, and we thank you for sharing your brain with us for the last 2 or 3 hours. If you could relay one message to the audience that you'd like them to take away from this far-reaching conversation, what would that be?
I'd say if it's like regarding learning poker, all I say is that what's important if you want to get good at poker is that your focus when you play should be about trying to improve all the time. If you keep improving all the time, you will eventually get very far. Maybe not to be the best on the world, but if you manage to create habits that lead to you improving daily, you will go very far away. And that's the most important thing. It will help with your emotional reaction to the game, and it will help you to be a better player. Even if you aren't optimizing the way you are studying, it will still do great for you if that's in your habits.
Great advice. Those 1% add up over time. Thank you so much for sharing the last 3+ hours with us, and yeah, it's been really good.
Thank you guys for the opportunity. Sorry for my broken English, and I feel that I speak too slowly in English. It's difficult for me to speak, to be more agile while speaking. I have to find the right word all the time. So thank you for all of you listeners that have endured through this very long conversation.
All right. Muchas gracias, Raúl. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your wisdom with our audience. Adam, what were your main takeaways of our conversation today?
Yeah, one topic that came up a lot was performance gaps and how challenging it is to play your best poker, regardless how much studying you've done, your knowledge coming in. And he talked about sleep being a big factor getting in his way. He talked about certain lifestyle factors that get in the way. And then he talked about emotions as well. I think at the start of the conversation, you were talking about talented poker players, how to identify them. He mentioned quick, intuitive thinking. Then he also mentioned emotional control. And I think it's really interesting to examine yourself and be really kind of honest about yourself of how well you show up and how well you perform. I think this is one of those things where you're never going to perform perfectly in terms of what you know, in terms of knowledge and 100% execution. But for most people, there's gaps between how they can execute. Is it come from emotions? Is it come from biases? Is it come from lifestyle factors? And just trying to kind of find ways to optimize all of those simultaneously. I'm not going to be overwhelming, but trying to find ways to perform better and realize that there's always a performance gap that we're trying to close and that you can never take for granted. You always need to be thinking mindfully about how to show up as your best self, which ties in with the topic of self-awareness, which we came over and over in terms of understand yourself, know what works for you. He mentioned a lot that he's got like a different brain, and he only figured out maybe 5-6 years ago that his brain's wired just completely different to other people's. He doesn't see visuals, he sees more in words, and then from there he can pick up patterns in different ways, but also he's got a very unique learning style for himself. And it all ties into like the understand yourself. When you understand yourself, you can navigate life so much better. You can understand things that don't work for you, things that do work for you, where your blind spots are, things that are creating problems. And very often in life, I feel like we get stuck because we don't have the self-awareness to take the easy path. we have resistance because we're doing it the hard way. We feel like we're doing it wrong. And in reality, we just haven't learned for ourselves what would work, what would go the easy path. And there's so many ways to your goals in life that if you spend time to understand yourself better, it's often easier. It's often not overcomplicated. And he mentions, we didn't go into the topics fully, but he mentioned we have the tendency to overcomplicate. And that's why we like solvers, because they're very complicated and we always gravitate towards that. But for me, self-awareness, when I gain it, is all about simplicity, all about making things easier. I wrote down the 3 lessons that he wanted to teach his kids through action. I think these are really good because I think that they resonate with me, but they were also just good life skills in terms of ways to show up in life. So the first one was helping others, and he wants to show up his teaching, his coaching, being a good father, but being a good kind of person that he helps other people. That's one lesson he wants to relate to them. The other one was long-term financial thinking, and he mentioned that he's very risk cautious and he's risk averse, but also like he thinks the long-term with his decisions. And he thinks that's something that's very important in terms of making long-term financial decisions. And then the final one was lifestyle habits in terms of eating well, food and sleep. And he mentioned that these are the things that he regrets during that patch where Spain got regulated and he had to do the kind of travel between England and Spain for a while. He mentioned that lifestyle factors really plummeted, and that was the worst time of his sport career in terms of results, performance. Yeah, I think it was really interesting to hear him speak so much about the things that impact performance. I wasn't expecting the conversation to go down that avenue, but he was very big on understanding himself, being able to perform better, being able to take care of the most important things so that you can show up as your best self consistently, which I thought was a really powerful theme that went through the conversation. How about yourself, Rene? What were the main things for you?
I mean, there was obviously one big elephant in the room, right? How kind of anti-solver he was. Now, obviously, we had kind of many solver talks, right, in these podcasts, but he was definitely the one that was most against it. And the main reason was that he thinks it just steers your attention away to what's actually important, right? If we think about solvers or strategies, you're usually focused inwards, right, towards your own range, instead of you're thinking about it in ranges and strategies, instead of thinking about what's the highest V play with my hand. And in order to make the highest V with your plan, you have to look outwards, right? Look towards the situation, your opponent's mistakes, information, right? Pattern recognition, something that he comes up. I would really label his skill mainly in terms of hand reading. I think that's kind of what it would in the end come down to, right? If we're taking player profiles, for example, he would explain specifically, like he understands the meta better than the theory, right? He understands people better. And if you understand people, you know how people play, then you can really narrow people down towards quite individual hands, right? He either has a bluff, he either has value. And then when you really know the range, the correct answer is easy. Well, obviously people usually don't really have that skill, or as he would argue, people spend too much time in solvers, so therefore they cannot learn this skill. Because obviously if you know the exact range, if you know the exact holding, the decision is easy. So I think that was kind of the main case why he is against solvers. Partly because the way they're used, and just because it occupies people with all their time trying to build perfect strategies, while there should be other things to focus on, which probably is hand reading, because then if you know what your opponent has, the decision is easy. He also, obviously, in order to do that, you have to realize that people are not balanced, right? That's obviously something that is required, and that people give away information. Also something that they actually ended up with, what I also liked, the daily habit of to improve, because that's where it all starts, right? You need to have a bigger goal, and there needs to be a necessity, there needs to be a reason to improve. There needs to be a reason to try to go beyond an average win rate. And how do you do that? Kind of going down the path, especially if you've already studied a lot in solvers. I personally still think, solvers can help you a lot if you use them well. But I definitely agree with Raúl that these other skills, especially at lower and mid stakes where people give away way more information, that just becomes way more important. So yeah, overall, great conversation with Raúl. I want to thank him again for coming on. I want to thank our audience for listening to us. Remember, if you want to work with both me and Adam, have us help you make more progress in your poker career, mechanicsofpoker.com. Also, shout out to our sponsors, CoinPoker, GTO Wizard, Snap MDA. Go check them out. Links in the description. And don't forget to give a like to this podcast if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.